Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and it's the afternoon of Friday, the 21st of April, 2017. Now, before we get to the big strategic picture, we have this problem of the descent into barbarism, which is now in full swing in the United States under the worst scoundrel auspices. And the descent into barbarism is most graphically illustrated this week by the desire of the state of Arkansas to go on a killing spree, to have a monstrous festival of capital executions by lethal injection. And seldom have we seen the intimate connection between political choices and the fate of the nation. The fate of individuals, of course, but also bound up with that, the status of civilization in these parts. So, as you know, you may know, the state of Arkansas said that they wanted to kill about 8 capital punishment inmates, right? Death row inmates. And they wanted to do that before the end of this month of April, right? They wanted to make sure that April would be the cruelest month. And they said, well, if we don't kill them now, then our drug cocktail will expire and we may not be able to buy any more. And then we can't kill anybody. And that will be a disaster. This is this guy, Asa Hutchinson, okay? Remember him? He emerged as a political power as an impeacher of Bill Clinton, just so you remember, back in 1998 and 1999. He was one of those managers, I think, of the impeachment, and he wanted to have the trial in the Senate with witnesses, he wanted. That was Asa. And so it's two brothers, I think it's Tim and Asa, and they both stink. So Governor Hutchinson wanted to have this festival of executions. And, of course, there were emergency appeals in the last minute. And some of these executions have been delayed. Some of them will be, I think, permanently delayed. Hard to tell, at least for the foreseeable future. But one was not. A black guy by the name of Liddell Lee was executed last night in Arkansas. And I don't know anything about his case, and I don't think this is the big relevant thing. The thing that I would like to point to, because we had predicted this several days before on the other show, on the American System, and I predicted if you put Gorsuch, this fine, decent man, good judge, good father, good husband, good citizen, you put him on the Supreme Court, he will act out the inhuman cruelty, which is his hallmark, I guess. And lo and behold, he did it. Gorsuch, last night, his first vote on the Supreme Court was to vote for death, the death penalty for Liddell Lee. Liddell Lee, I think somebody who never had a chance in life, and his life is now over. And I think this is a permanent stain on whatever this country claims to be. So Gorsuch, of course, joined with Roberts, Thomas, Alito, and Kennedy. And it was a 5-4 decision, just as Senator Whitehouse had predicted. Senator Whitehouse read this list of liberticide decisions, right? For those of you out there in the with the low iodine areas, liberticide, again, meaning that kills liberty. Homicide kills a person, right? Liberticide kills liberty itself. So the liberticide clique on the Supreme Court, Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Kennedy, and Gorsuch, they voted, so it was 5-4. Breyer, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan voted to stay the execution, right, to give this a chance. So Gorsuch, exactly as we predicted, acted out what you could expect to be the cruelty. The same cruelty we saw in the frozen trucker case, the poor woman, the cancer victim with a bone marrow transplant, the case of the needy boy who was disabled and needed special care and needed to get that paid for because his family couldn't afford it, and on and on. So Gorsuch has done that. And this, I think, this is the descent into barbarism. Just a couple of comments on this, perhaps. I think there's a comment here somewhere from, maybe I don't have it anymore. A comment from Justice, here we go. Justice Breyer noted, he said, there's no reason to rush this, according to Breyer. What is the rush to execute after the guy's been on death row for quite a few years? Quote, apparently the reason the state of Arkansas decided to proceed with these 8 executions is that the use-by date, the expiration date on the state execution drugs is about to expire. That factor, when considered as a determining factor separating those who live from those who die, is close to random. So what this points to, of course, is the permanent structural monstrosity of the death penalty and the need to dispense with this, right? To join much of civilized humanity, not all, but at least everybody in Europe by now has put this aside. The guy was accused of a 1993 murder. He has maintained his innocence. His lawyers were trying to get him additional DNA testing, and so forth. And we know there are enough of these DNA cases that have been overturned to show that this was a reasonable thing. Okay, so that's number one. I feel indignant about this because it's so predictable, and all that stuff, right? That wonderful clubby atmosphere in that hearing, right? The chortling and the sort of faculty club collective identity in the Senate hearing with the Republicans and so forth. And what that hides is, of course, barbarism of precisely this type, because those were all the Republican appointees. And again, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, Kennedy, Gorsuch. That's your 5 now. That's what you've got. And we hear from Senator Grassley that there's going to be another vacancy as early as this summer. God help us. God help us is all I can say. We got to somehow hope for some rapid change in this situation, right? In other words, there's got to be some way to stop this before we have the complete descent into barbarism. Actually, beyond barbarism, of course, there's always savagery. So maybe we have barbarism now and we're headed for savagery tomorrow. Now then, you want to protest? You want to do something about this? Well, we're happy to see that this week already we've had Tax Day. We've had the Tax Day rallies on April 15th, I guess last Saturday. That was 200 cities and at least 125,000 people. Good show. Now, this one, of course, did have a demand, although a very limited one. It had a demand saying, we demand to see Trump's tax returns. And that's a good demand because that leads eventually towards some things that might resolve this situation, if you can see what I'm getting at, right? That perhaps this regime will not last as long as commonly expected. And one step in that direction might indeed be to examine these tax returns, right? Who knows what we will find. Probably that a lot of them have not been audited, despite what was said. We'll be back with you here in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Here we are again on the afternoon of Friday, the 21st of April, 2017. Now, we did have the Tax Day protests, and that's a good thing. At least they had one demand. We want to see the tax returns. But again, this is so narrow. Please, dear organizers, dear left liberals, dear activists, can't you think a little bit ahead? If you're going to have that many people, 125,000 people, is Trump's tax return really the only thing you can think of? How about something like a transaction tax, what we call a Wall Street sales tax? Some call it a Robin Hood tax, a trading tax, a financial transfer tax. There are all kinds of names for it. We think Wall Street sales tax is the best one because it tells you exactly what it is. And remember, Bernie Sanders had that in his platform. He said that he wanted to have a financial transfer tax, a Wall Street sales tax, in order to pay for his free college program. Mrs. Clinton, well hidden in her website, but still there because I saw it myself, she also had a financial transfer tax, i.e. Wall Street sales tax. So if both Clinton and Bernie had the Wall Street sales tax, then why, in the name of all that is rational, could we not have the tax day people say, by the way, we want Wall Street to pay, and since they have all these smart lawyers and they park their money in the Bahamas and whatever else they do, we want to make sure that's collected at the point of transfer. In other words, where they're speculating, stocks, bonds, and above all, derivatives of all kinds, over-the-counter as well as exchange-traded. And the way you enforce the over-the-counter is if you didn't pay the tax, it's not enforceable, so you can't bring it into court. That would be highly effective. So again, I would ask, plan ahead. And the same thing goes now. We have today, Saturday the 22nd, really tomorrow, but by the time you hear this, it'll be today. We have the March of the Scientists and the Teachers. Will this be political? Well, it's not explicitly political. This is a problem. We all know what the idea here is, right? These are people who are not happy with the Trump administration. They don't like the new head of the Environmental Protection Agency. And of course, well, they might be because these are bad things. However, I would say two points, right? First of all, critical support from here for the March of the Scientists and the Teachers in Washington and in other cities on Saturday, the 22nd of April. Critical support. The critical is, please don't let this just be a festival of Malthusianism where we're told that global warming means that your living standard has to be cut, that jobs will have to be destroyed, that we have to have a war on various industries and so forth, right? This is simply no good. If you do that, you're going to make sure that all of those Appalachian places, right, from West Virginia to Kentucky to Ohio to nearby places, Michigan, Wisconsin, the ones that decided the election, to make ourselves clear, you're going to consign them to the Republican column forever. In other words, you've got to come up with something better, a better emphasis. Why not emphasize how science can make everybody's life better? There's also a problem about infrastructure. You've got to be in favor of infrastructure. This is where science meets the lives of everyday people. The maglev rail, the modern electricity production, the modernization of the grid, the high-speed internet for rural areas, right? All kinds of things for rural America. But if you have people who think that building some simple-minded gas pipeline or oil pipeline is the suicide of the planet, if you have an active faction, which you now have, an active faction in the Democratic Party funded by wealthy environmentalist elitists who say pipelines and infrastructure are bad, then you have repudiated the heritage of the New Deal, and you'll never get out of the Depression. Because the only way you get out of the Depression, politically as well as economically, is to build modern infrastructure, right? New versions of all these things. So please, scientists and teachers, don't make this a festival of Malthusian pessimism and how you've got to give up your already wretched standard of living. There is also something coming up further, which is the Climate March. I guess it's called the People's Climate March. That's a week later. That's on the 29th of April. And I fear that one will generate some grist for the Trumpian mill. In other words, if he can point to that saying, look at those leftists. Hey, you blue-collar guys, look at those leftists. They don't care about you. They're planning ways to throw you out of work and pitch you into greater and greater immiseration. Well, this is not the way to do it. So those are the things that's coming up. Let me also add, though, the one positive thing is even though Gorsuch was able to use his vote to execute this poor guy in Arkansas, Governor McAuliffe, obviously Clintonista, money man, not our favorite person, but he stepped in. There was an execution scheduled in Virginia last night. We almost had 2 executions in the same night. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe commuted the death sentence of Ivan Teleguz, 38-year-old guy who was going to be executed in the murder of his former girlfriend. Maintains innocence, 2001 slaying. And here's what McAuliffe said. I believe he is guilty, but during the trial, there were tremendous irregularities. The jury was falsely told. The jury was lied to. Apparently, the prosecutor lied that Teleguz had been involved already in a murder in Pennsylvania, but that murder never happened. Prosecutors pointed to testimony of the supposed crime in Pennsylvania as evidence that the defendant Teleguz solves his problems with murder. So the jury acted on false information, and McAuliffe says, okay, commute that to a life sentence. Okay? So at least a baby step away from this kind of barbarism. Anyway, we've got all kinds of protests going on. You will have seen some very vigorous, very encouraging protests. Once again, Tom Cotton taking it on the chin. Senator Heller of Nevada getting raked over the coals. This is every time there's a congressional recess now, this is a good occasion to cross-examine these characters, hold their feet to the fire. Notice that Feinstein did not escape, that she was confronted about her complacency, and she was saying, yeah, I've gotten more done. Getting more done in that narrow sense is not the point anymore, Senator Feinstein. It's what have you done to fight the obvious threats to the Constitution and to freedom in the American people. We'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. And no discussion of the death penalty would be complete without mentioning the fact that back in 1989, the current tenant of the Oval Office paid his own money to put an ad in the New York papers, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. And this was the case of the Central Park Five. The Central Park jogger was the victim. Turns out these guys did not do it. They were falsely accused. The current tenant of the White House wanted them executed as soon as possible. And, well, that sets the stage, right? Notice a lot of this stuff with the death penalty has to do with the obvious fact, right? It's always involved in these police cases, too. We have a property order which is unjust. It is wrong. It is morally indefensible in terms of the inequality which goes on, right? The system is rigged. There is redistribution from the middle class and the poor to the super rich. That's what's going on. That's the secret behind this so-called infrastructure program. But as long as you have that kind of an unjust, horrendous property order, the police are expected to defend that. And that, of course, then leads to an untenable situation from which all of these other things, or many of them, tend to descend. All right. So now let's look at the coming week. We had to get some of the high-handed outrages out of the way. Look, Friday, April 28th. This is going to be essentially the end of the 100 days. The end of the 100 days. And let's get into the policy content. It means that on April 28th, the current spending authority of the United States federal budget will expire. The government will still have money, but it will not be allowed to spend that money. So this is the budget, right? This is a budget deal that goes back to, I think, the lame duck session last December. So at the end of the 100 days, we have this budget deadline. So a compromise must be reached, or at least, forget compromise. The House of Representatives and the Senate must pass some kind of a spending authorization, be it a continuing resolution, simply continue on the existing basis, or the government will shut down. And, of course, everybody knows that when the government shuts down, the Republicans did it, because this is their right-wing anarchist philosophy, right? This is their contempt for the public. The public be damned. We're going to make sure that we observe the ideology of von Hayek and Ayn Rand and other horrendous relics of barbarism. So there is now a scramble, or there ought to be a scramble. There's really not a scramble. Trump seems to be relatively indifferent to this. But this is now the great irony, right? The 100 days, Roosevelt's 100 days, right? An epic succession, a cavalcade of tremendously important legislation that began to lift the country out of depression and despair and avoid the complete breakdown of society, right? The descent into chaos and anarchy that was lurking because of Hoover, and Hoover saying, I'm sorry, but my free market principles don't allow me to do anything to deal with this depression. I can't violate that. It was essentially the Grover Cleveland attitude, right? Even though Grover Cleveland was a Democrat, doesn't matter. He was a Wall Street guy, and so was Hoover when it came to that. So there has to be something passed. Now, here's the idea. The Republicans have already given up on the 40 Tea Party lunatics currently calling themselves the Freedom Caucus, right? These 40 lunatics are the fruits of census irregularities, in my view, but above all of gerrymandering. And then they are the fruits of the O'Reilly degeneration of the Republican Party ideology. In other words, an ideology that becomes more and more extreme as a cover-up for the kinds of corporate welfare and corporate pork barrels that are actually being passed by the people in Washington. I think we have a quote somewhere here from Dave Bratt, one of the leading lights of this collection of borderline psychotics in the Freedom Caucus. And Dave Bratt says, "What are you blaming us for? We're just doing our job," or whatever he says, right? And of course, no, I'm sorry. Your Cantor was already a reactionary, and that makes Bratt what? An ultra reactionary. By the way, I'm going to launch a campaign now. I'm going to be like Cato the Elder. Stop calling them conservatives. They're not. They're right-wing radicals, right-wing extremists, extreme reactionaries. Some of them have crossed over into fascism. And stop calling them nationalists. They're not. They're racists. They're nativists. They're secessionists in many cases, in effect. So they're not nationalists. And that applies to people overseas too. Stop calling Marine Le Pen a nationalist, right? She's on a collision course with most of the French population. So here's what we have now. The Freedom Caucus has made it known that they won't vote for anything, right? They're simply a kind of a cancerous mass sitting there in the House of Representatives. A little bit like in Weimar Germany, you had different caucuses, right? The National Socialists wouldn't vote for anything, and the Communists wouldn't vote for anything. So it meant that in the middle, you could never get a majority for anything between those two extreme masses. So the idea is, therefore, that even though Ryan has not really announced this, Ryan has essentially come to see that he's going to need Democratic votes. Let's see what the Washington Post says about that this morning, Friday, April 21st. Republican leaders have already admitted that they are unable to craft a spending bill that can appease the far right flank of the GOP and they have turned to Democrats to deliver the votes instead. The Democrats say they are willing to work with the Republicans to avoid a government shutdown, but any effort to schedule a vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act would destroy those talks and threaten precisely the government shutdown that the Republicans have vowed to avoid. And here we have Congressman Crowley, who's, I must say, been doing a good job. He's been doing Queens proud this week. This is the spirit of Queens, not Trump, but Crowley. And he says, if you try to repeal Obamacare, there's not going to be any warm, fuzzy feeling, and that will sink any talks. Now, here's the idea. It's a tripartite issue. There's the budget. Now, this budget, of course, is the fiscal year 2017. It's the one we're in. Okay, so this went from last October 1st, really, but then it was extended to December, and now it's been extended to now, to the 28th of April. So fiscal year 2017 budget. So what we're talking about is spending between now and October 1st. This is generally not the extreme austerity budget that Trump and company, Mulvaney, Mnuchin, and so forth, submitted a month or so ago, right? It's a bit of a different thing. So the differences come down to the following. To get from now to October 1st, will there be money for the odious xenophobic wall, the Mexican border wall, right? Total cost, $15 billion, $20 billion, $25 billion. Man, you could do a lot with that money. So I think in this budget, it's a couple of billion. But will Democrats vote for that? They better not. If any Democrat votes for that wall, they are finish. They are gone. Sayonara to them if they vote for the wall. And then there are a couple of other issues lurking. We'll get back with that in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Once again, it's Friday the 21st of April. So look, a budget, something has to be done by April 28th. Otherwise, Trump will wind up the 100 days by celebrating the shutdown of the government. And he made one of his sort of, what can we say, dilettantish comments about this thing. Yeah, we'd rather avoid a government shutdown, wouldn't we? Let's keep the government open. Wouldn't that be good? Yeah, I hope so. But are you willing to walk the walk? So look, the wall. No Democrat can vote for anything to do with this wall. This is a waste. This is an insult. This is a monument of shame. This is the Berlin Wall in reverse. We don't want it. That's one. Then there are things like Planned Parenthood, right? This is an integral part of health care for so many millions of people, especially women. No Democrat can come near that with a 99-foot pole. And then we have the Obamacare subsidies, right? So we've got this vandalism going on where we're told, yeah, we Republican fat cats will allow the Obamacare to implode, not of its own dynamics, but because we'll cut off the money. We'll cut off the subsidies that are used to allow people to pay the premiums to these wonderful private insurance companies, which is the way it's done. But that's what you have right now. And they need to go to the doctor next month, so there's got to be a solution for this right now. Trump has said he might cut off the subsidies. He could do that in a number of ways. We've gone through them. But he can cut off the subsidies. He doesn't need Congress for that. He hasn't done it so far. If he does, the Democratic answer to that is, well, if you're cutting off the subsidies, that's very bad, and that will be on you. You will bear the historical responsibility for the death and suffering that will come out of that. And we still have to vote against you because still, even minus the subsidies, Obamacare the way it is still better than these things that you're coming up with. What are those? Well, we'll see. By the way, the Brat quote was, he said that the Freedom Caucus agreed with Trump, but a swamp monster came forward and prevented that bill from going through. So Brat is seeing things, right? He's got a kind of a tropical fever from the miasma. So that's Brat, one of the leading leading ones of these Freedom Caucus extremists. So Trump is telling us the bill is getting better and better and better, and it's really great. It's really good now, and it's liked by a lot of people. It's a really great bill, great health care. So this is the usual sales hype, and I don't think this can convince anybody. What it comes down to is this. What's the new bill? We have all kinds of people writing today that the new bill it's either the same as the old bill. In other words, this is now Trump Care, Ryan Care, as against Obamacare that they want to roll back and destroy. Many have concluded that Trump does not know what's in the new bill. Many have concluded that Trump does not care what's in the new bill. It can be anything. He doesn't care. Doesn't care what happens to you either. But he wants, as he would put it, a win. He wants to pass something, even if it's just passing something through the House of Representatives, which is, a kind of a lockstep, monolithic, top-down organization. Well, he thinks that's a win. Whatever you get through the House is not going to pass the Senate. That's the rule of thumb at the current moment. Now, here's the difference, though. Congressman Tom MacArthur, Republican of New Jersey, this is supposed to be a measure to attract conservatives and moderates. And we're told that there are talks between they're not conservatives. They're reactionaries, ultra-reactionaries of the Freedom Caucus Tea Party, on the one hand, and the Tuesday Club, the Tuesday group on the other. And these are I would call them moderate reactionaries, but of course reactionaries nonetheless. So it's a negotiation between MacArthur for the moderate reactionaries and Meadows for the extreme reactionaries. And the basic word is waiver. Waiver. Waiver means that a state can opt out. They can just not participate in a federal program. Waiver, W-A-I-V-E-R. There will be a conference call tomorrow, Saturday, the 22nd. While the science march is going on, the scientists and teachers will be marching in Washington, D.C., implicitly against the administration. There will be this conference call. The MacArthur Amendment, here's what the Washington Post says. The MacArthur Amendment would allow states to obtain permission from the federal government to write their own list of essential health benefits and allow insurers to charge people with pre-existing conditions higher premiums. Woo! And also make available a high-risk pool. High-risk pools have been tried. They're wretched. They don't work. It's lousy. Nobody likes them. As a concession to moderates, the amendment would also add back federal requirements for essential health benefits, right? The 10, we've been through that, right? They wanted to strip you. This guy, Price, is impudent. He's as impudent as the day is long. Because when you say to him, look, don't you think the federal government can set a minimum standard of saying these are the things that have to be included in the health insurance policy, inpatient, outpatient, mental health, opioid, on and on. Don't you think those ought to be mandatory? Because the little guy wants to have insurance. He doesn't know what's going to happen. That's the whole point. You don't know what's going to hit you. And you say, well, I'm not going to get cancer. Right? Heart attack maybe, but cancer never, or the reverse. Right? It doesn't work this way. You don't know the future. Therefore, the minimum standard has to make a lot of sense. And Price said, no. 20 million people have said that they don't want some bureaucrat in Washington telling them what they have to do. So the idea is, we're going to sell you a mini-med. We're going to sell you junk insurance, worthless policies, not worth the paper they're written on. And we're going to call that freedom. Ayn Rand is so happy. Ayn Rand is smiling down on the Freedom Caucus. All right. So the House leadership, Ryan, has retired into the background. The committee chairs have retired into the background. Right now, it's MacArthur and the Tuesday group and Meadows and the extremist Freedom Caucus. So the problem is this, it won't work because it's like pulling a cover, right? When the blanket is too small for the bed, you pull it one way, one person gets cold, you pull it the other way, the other one gets cold. It doesn't work because whatever you gain with the Freedom Caucus, you're going to lose with the moderates and vice versa. The other problem, of course, is what's with the Medicaid expansion? All those Republican states, example, Ohio, that have accepted the Medicaid expansion are finding that it's necessary and they can't meet those fees. And otherwise, that governor is going to be seen as presiding over stripping all those people of their medical care. So, again, and the other idea is that if the Republicans can't muster their own majority, 216, then they will, 217, 218, they will have to go to the Democrats. And the Democrats will say, okay, no wrecking of Obamacare, subsidies paid, Planned Parenthood paid, no money for the wall. Okay? Because you said Mexico would pay. So take that, put that in your pipe and smoke it. We're told right now that the Trump care or Ryan care, or what are we going to call it, right? Republican care bill is being workshopped. It's being workshopped right now. This means there is no text. There is no bill. There will be a conference call tomorrow. They need Democratic votes most likely. And in the middle of all this, the Republicans are going to unload a tax cut bill. Tax cuts for the rich will go into the hopper in the House of Representatives next week. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. So next Friday, Saturday, it will be the end of the 100 days, and that celebration may be the shutdown of the federal government. That's one problem with the budget. And lurking not too far behind, we don't know when, this adds to the uncertainty, is the possibility of state bankruptcy, federal default, insolvency of the United States government, expressly prohibited by the 14th Amendment. There's something that would look appropriate in a bill of impeachment. If you don't take care that the laws be faithfully executed, then that can go in there and it sticks because that's the Constitution, right? Way above statute law. So the 100 days, right? The original 100 days, of course, Napoleon, between his return from Elba, his attempt to remobilize the French army, the Grande Armée, his defeat at Waterloo, and his departure for St. Helena on the other side of the world. So that's about 100 days, right? This adventure by Napoleon. He got tired of being confined in the island of Elba. Then we have Franklin D. Roosevelt's 100 Days, one of the glorious chapters of American history. Tremendous success, optimism, and somebody who knew what to do, at least in many areas, and where he didn't know, he was willing to learn, right? He was not frozen in the ice of indifference, but he was warmly and generously looking for solutions, sometimes by trial and error, as he was the first to acknowledge. And now we've got Trump's 100 days. Will it end with a shutdown of the U.S. government to crown the chaos that we've seen so far? Some are thinking in terms of another number, the 120 Days of Salò by Pierpaolo Pasolini, a truly terrifying movie, as being perhaps adequate to the current situation. One of the commentators on CNN said, Why don't we raise it to 200 days? Give him a chance. Fine. It can't be done, right? The 100 days are the 100 days. So now, the combination, the budget, the wall, Obamacare, and I guess you can throw in Planned Parenthood. Schumer says that the Democrats will not cooperate in the Senate, in particular, if there is not a very firm commitment in the bill, right? A law forcing, mandating, obliging compelling, coercing the federal government to pay those subsidies. Okay? So that's how it is, right? As we go into the last week of the 100 days. Hillary Clinton, I think superficial and blasé as usual. She says, oh yeah, the election hit a lot of us hard. Madame Clinton, this election bids fair to ruin a lot of lives. Some lives even can be ended by the result of this election. So hitting a lot of us hard in terms of your tastes or your ideas of what ought to be. This is totally inadequate. Now, the question that we had to ask, it's 9 o'clock. Do you know where your aircraft carrier battle groups are? The Carl Vinson, we know this week we've had the spectacle of chaos, right? My original theme here at the beginning is chaos in domestic affairs, chaos on the home front, chaos in terms of foreign policy. So one is, we're told that the Carl Vinson and its associated battle groups of Aegis cruisers, Aegis destroyers, and support ships, plus an unknown number of submarines. And they don't talk about the submarines. They're there, but they're not in the picture because they're under the water. So to blab a lot about the submarines and whether they're ballistic missile or hunter-killer or both, as is likely, then you're not supposed to get too specific. So it was going in the wrong direction. The Vinson was not going north towards the Sea of Japan and Korea. It was going south through the Sunda Strait into the Indian Ocean. And that fiction was maintained for the best part of a week. We had reports, I don't know, still unconfirmed, that 2 additional carriers, 1 carrier from Japan, 1 carrier from Oregon, were also going to converge. That was actually scary, but now who knows what that actually was. And we had this grotesque, bizarre episode of the unauthorized CENTCOM communique couched in scurrilous, obscene language, threatening, blustering against North Korea. Hard to imagine who might have written that, but somehow it got released. And then the following day, the U.S. Central Command in Tampa had to put out a repudiation, right, a denial, a démenti, saying, no, this is not us. This was unauthorized. Well, how does somebody unauthorized get to issue communiques in the name of U.S. Central Command? So we're being told that China is being very cooperative. They're helping with North Korea. At the same time, 6 North Korean coal ships have docked in China. So it looks like trade has been resumed. We had a nice article in the Washington Post this week about how China is providing the key technology for the North Korean missiles, and I suspect also for the North Korean nuclear program. That's all coming off the world market through China. Russia reporting massing troops between Vladivostok and the North Korean border. We're all hearing that it's 11 kilometers, 7 miles of border. I think the town of Razin is there. That was the name given to this area during the Korean War. Russian troops massing. Chinese troops also massing. What is that? I think it might be to try to ward off a tremendous influx of refugees from North Korea in case all-out hostilities, conventional war, nuclear war, thermonuclear war, because we've heard that also this week from the Korean representative at the United Nations. In case that ensues, then a lot of people would be wanting to get out of there. We've also got Crazy Ivan. We got Bear bombers flying near Alaska for the 4th time in 4 days. They have been buzzing Alaska. These are, of course, the obsolete Bear turboprop bombers, but they are nuclear capable. They are formidable. They have been intercepted by the U.S. Air Force. They have been operating over international airspace. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but at the same time, I would say this is not wise. Whoever's making these decisions in the Kremlin should really ask, what are you doing? One possibility, the pre-Munich plot. Now, I can't go through this in very much detail, but get yourself a hold of an older book. It's called Europe on the Eve. Europe on the Eve by Friedrich Schumann, S-C-H-U-M-A-N-N, I think, or maybe one N. He was a professor at Williams College, and essentially his idea was that the whole kabuki theater of the Munich sellout. In other words, Chamberlain goes to meet Hitler at Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps. Then he comes to meet Hitler at Bad Godesberg in the Rhineland. Then he comes to meet Hitler at Munich, and that's the conference, right, chaired by Mussolini with Daladier and others, not the Czechs, not the Soviets. That entire sequence was designed to scare the public out of their wits, right? Gas masks distributed, trenches dug in Hyde Park, right? Bomb-proof shelters organized, all this stuff. Air raid drills. The public had to be scared to the point where they would eagerly embrace the Munich sellout, because that was what Chamberlain wanted to do. He wanted to reward Hitler and, above all, send him east. But he was afraid that the public reaction might overthrow him if he didn't prepare the ground. So the pre-Munich plot is a desire to scare public opinion and then take advantage of that to come up with a sellout which would have been unthinkable a week or two earlier, but then becomes eagerly embraced. Maybe that's what's going on. However, the element of chaos, we've got Tillerson and the rest of them, and we'll try to sum this up here when we come back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, chaos and confusion in the realm of foreign policy, and this is actually getting to be it's been scary for a while. One war at a time, wouldn't you say? That was what Lincoln said to Seward when Seward said, hey, let's solve the problem of the Confederacy by having a war with the British. Lincoln wisely, one war at a time, please. That's more than enough. So the current administration has bombed Syria. They have unleashed the Moab, mother of all bombs, on Afghanistan. We've got a crisis going, looks like it's mainly provoked from the U.S. side, right, with the DPRK. That is North Korea, or Pyongyang, not Pyongyang, Pyongyang. That is to say, with President Kim of North Korea. We got that going on, and that could escalate at any time, right? Another nuclear test, another missile test, and so forth. Who knows? I'm skeptical, as you just said. A lot of this stuff smells of pre-Munich plot. And again, this is the distinguished professor from 1939, not some conspiracy theorist of our own benighted time here, the eclipse of humanity that we live in. But then, don't you think that's enough? You got Syria going, you got Afghanistan going, you got the DPRK, you got crazy Ivans in the Far East and in the Baltic and the Black Sea. Now they want to pick a fight with Iran. This is just amazing. Earlier this week, Tillerson certified for purposes of law that Iran had observed its commitments, had fulfilled its commitments under the Iran nuclear accord. I think that's called the JCPOA. I may have the acronym garbled, but it's the Iran nuclear accord that we're talking about. So they've done what they committed to do, and the accord is narrow. It doesn't say stop insulting the U.S. It doesn't say stop supporting Hezbollah. It just says things about nuclear matters, and those provisions are being honored and carried out to the letter. But now we've got Tillerson saying, wait a minute, they're engaging in provocations. They're doing things that we don't like. We may have to essentially repudiate the deal. Well, lots of luck with that. The deal is now part of international law. It means the deal was codified into a United Nations Security Council resolution, which was passed with the affirmative vote of the 5 veto-wielding permanent members, U.S., U.K., Russia, China, France. They all said yes. This is now binding. You can't say no, we don't like it. And as a practical matter, you can reimpose sanctions, which will free Iran to pursue any bomb they want, if that's really what you're going to do. But nobody else in the world will observe those sanctions. They'll just say, well, that's this crazy U.S. administration, right? Those are the nihilists on the Potomac, once again, coming forward to cause trouble. So this is bad business. We've also got Russiagate going on. And there's a lot of material here. There's actually more than we can cover. I urge everybody, subscribe. Go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. Go there and get yourself a subscription. It's about $7 a month for the economy version. You can also get one for about $20 a month. The $7 a month gets you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 1 hour plus of commentary there. We track all of this stuff, right? A lot of stuff we have to fleetingly summarize here, which is done in detail there. The Reuters has come up with an interesting dispatch, which is, it's rather poor in detail, but it makes the following assertion, that the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies, led by academician or president of the Institute, Fradkov, came up with an actual, somewhat articulated, somewhat detailed plan to interfere in the U.S. election, originally to simply generate doubt, lack of confidence in the mechanisms, the stuff about vote fraud and all the rest of it, voter fraud, as some of them say it. And later on, it switched into this mode of let's get Trump elected, and maybe he can lift the sanctions. And of course, really, hardly a night goes by without some embarrassing revelations. We don't even need to go through the list of all of the people from the Trump campaign who are now shown to have been consorting with Russian officials and then in many cases lying about it, or in many cases not revealing it. So what you've got now is a pattern. One case you can always argue with. One case you can always say, no, this isn't valid, it doesn't apply. But when it gets to be 2, 3, many cases, then the pattern assumes a kind of objective validity all its own. And that's what you have to worry about. Once again, I would recommend that people go back to the so-called third period of the Communist International. You have to see that for much of the 20th century, Soviet Russia and the Soviet Union, USSR, as a matter of course, interfered in the internal affairs of other states, sometimes through the Soviet government, but principally through the Communist International, in particular the Executive Committee of the Communist International. Under the guidance of Stalin, that included Bukharin, Zinoviev, the economist Eugen Varga, and others. And they had this thing called the Third Period from 1928 until, 1935, 1936, more or less. And this was that there was a danger of fascism, but the danger of fascism didn't come from fascism. It came from the Social Democrats, from the labor hacks, from the trade union guys, from people like Friedrich Ebert and others in the Social Democratic Party, right? Hermann Müller, the Chancellor of Germany, those were the social fascists. So the Stalin theory of social fascism was applied by the KPD, the German Communist Party, under Thälmann, acting under strict orders from Moscow, from the Executive Committee of the Communist International. And what they did was to say, we're going to concentrate our fire not on Hitler, but on the Social Democrats. They're the social fascists. Their unions are the conveyor belts of social fascism and all the rest. So it meant that the Nazis were attacking the Social Democrats and the communists were also attacking the Social Democrats. And this was part of the way that Hitler was able to seize power. And then, you might say, well, why do that? Well, because he's going to cause tremendous social tension, he's going to cause chaos, and he's going to go to war with his neighbors. But, of course, ultimately, that didn't turn out to be very smart, did it? By June of 1941, the Soviets regretted that they had supported the seizure of power by Hitler. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. All right, we had the first round of the election in Georgia 6. Ossoff got 48% of the vote. This is encouraging. Don't give up. Hey, don't wilt now, millennials. Time to fight. he has a very good chance of getting that seat. And I really don't care so much about him. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Whether he's a progressive or not, I would have to say to Bernie Sanders, look, Bernie, you're not going to get the big progressive from the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, right? Why don't you go to Los Angeles or New York or somewhere in Massachusetts? You want to get progressives, they're not going to come from Georgia, right? He's not going to be a left-wing Democrat. Let him be a centrist Democrat. Who knows whether he's a progressive? This is not the issue. Is he willing to vote for, God, Pelosi as Speaker of the House? And if he is, that's pretty much the ball game, the way the House of Representatives works. Although it would be nice to get rid of Pelosi in the meantime. So the opposition is this woman, Karen Handel. She is a colorless hack. She is not new, not fresh, not interesting. She's a wheel horse. Karen Handel ran for Senate, failed, ran for governor, failed, former lieutenant governor. No great shakes. The idea that every Republican is going to come out for her, I don't think so, because she's got all those enemies. So buckle down and get ready to win the second round of the ballotage in June. Now, speaking of Bernie, what's the direction of the Democratic Party? He's right to say that the Democratic Party does not have a comprehensive program to appeal to American people. It does not have, in my view, the Democratic Party does not have a program for economic recovery. It does not have a program for job creation and full employment. It does not have the kind of tax reform that you would need, which centers on the Wall Street sales tax. And above all, the Democratic Party is not talking about changing the role of the Federal Reserve so that the Federal Reserve would not be of the bankers, by the bankers, for the bankers, but would take responsibility for the health of the entire economy, meaning in particular 0% or low interest federal credit, buying the bonds of state and regional authorities, cities, counties, and so forth, to create infrastructure. In other words, Krugman says it's obvious we should borrow money while it's cheap to borrow. Why should we have to borrow money? We have the Federal Reserve System, happy to give a $27 trillion line of credit to world zombie banks, right? To Societe Generale, Barclays Bank, and other European zombies. Why don't they lend for the American infrastructure program? Because otherwise, as Krugman does point out, we're going to be caught in this terrible bind of tax breaks to the rich so that they can put money in and then collect tolls. And they'll be able to do that till kingdom come. So this is no good. Therefore, the infrastructure plan as the motor of economic recovery. I'm just afraid that with Bernie Sanders, once again, if you say, where's the program? He's going to come up with something that's to a large degree a Malthusian extravaganza, a zero growth, anti-science, anti-technology. The Democrats claim to take their stand on science and technology when it comes to this global warming stuff, where I think the case is weakest for them. But when it comes to other things, right, modern energy production, space program, they don't pay a lot of attention to this. So it's a very, very mixed bag. Therefore, the Tax Wall Street Party renews its commitment to provide the kind of program that would make it possible for the Republican Party to be ushered into its richly deserved oblivion of extinction. We also have to compare, right? What's going on elsewhere in the, say, the English-speaking world? Corbyn and the Labour Party. This guy Corbyn turns out to be a failure. Looks like the Labour Party is running 20 points behind the Conservatives, the Tories, the reactionaries. And this Theresa May is an uglier reactionary than Cameron before her. He was bad enough, God knows. But Theresa May is even worse. And what you're seeing now, the poisoned fruits of Brexit, right? Brexit, always bad, getting worse. Theresa May, according to some commentators, Theresa May is aiming at a knockout blow. to destroy the Labour Party once and for all, so that there'll be really no opposition except for a negligible liberal Democratic Party. And it's Democratic Party, better realize, no more identity politics as the be-all and end-all of everything. Obviously, you want to have some of it to keep people interested, since that's what they've been dieting on for the past several decades. But the main thing has to be mass traction economic demands that will appeal across these identity politics lines. And I would say the combination of Pelosi and Perez, it doesn't seem to be working. You got to get somebody who looks a little bit more like a trade union guy, right? Somebody from the shop floor. The Democrats have made the terrible mistake of internalizing these distinctions. In other words, if the census form asks you, are you white, black, Hispanic, Asian, and Pacific Islander, and so on down the line, you don't have to internalize that. Those are not real distinctions when it comes to an economic program, right? In other words, free college means free college for everybody, disregarding, without reference to any of these identity politics groups. So why do you internalize that? And then, of course, the wedge issues, right? The guy in Kansas had some pro-gun ads. Well, it's Kansas. How in God's name are you going to get some Democrat elected in Kansas unless he goes through this genuflection for the gun rights, right, which is what these poor people have been told was the essence of their liberties for all these years. In other words, you've got to be more flexible. You can't internalize the wedge issue. So the Democratic Party has capitulated ideologically to the political correctness line, right, the idea of divide and conquer, which is implicit in the Kerner report, which is implicit in Nixon's and Schultz's Philadelphia plan from 1970, right? Essentially, let's get the various groups fighting over the shrinking pie. You can't emphasize the group identity to that extent. What we want to do is expand the pie, and in particular, we want to expand the pie by making Wall Street and the Fed pay for it, and that goes beyond identity politics. We do have one good piece of news here, a somewhat obscure race here in the D.C. suburbs. It is for the office of, clerk of the court of Prince William County. Here, an insurgent Democrat, Jackie Smith, a woman, defeated the entrenched delegate Jackson H. Miller, who is the Republican House Minority Whip in Richmond, and she defeated him by 8 points, even though he had spent 5 or 6 times, 7 times as much money. So the idea is the precursors, right, the first tremors of this huge earthquake that we need to have in November 2018, they're already coming. But the stubborn narrow-mindedness, the stubborn doctrinaire stuff coming from the left, from the Democratic Party, is one of the things that can save Trump in extremis. So it's a mass strike, and you got to have economic demands that are adequate to the mass strike. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's our final segment. My heavens, so many outrages, so little time. We've been doing the U.S. internal politics. Once again, it's a mass strike. And you got to have mass traction economic demands. The Democrats have been incapable of an autopsy, right? There's this book this week, Shattered, by Miss Parnes and her co-author. It's not adequate, right? It veers towards the soap opera stuff. But take a look. It's worth considering. French election on Sunday. Okay, French election. Let's set the stage. 100 years ago this week, one of the biggest bloodbaths of World War I, the Chemin des Dames, the Aisne, A-I-S-N-E, Chemin des Dames in northern France. It's a ridge. They were trying to attack it. Big artillery buildup. Send the troops forward. Frontal attack. General Nivelle, Nivelle, the new commander. And he said, you won't even have to get your rifle off your shoulder. You keep your rifle slung. You're just going to walk through. General Mangin said that he would have his headquarters at Laon the following day. Yeah. Instead, bloodbath, tremendously strong position, one of the best in the German line, part of the new Hindenburg line, I think. 17,000 dead, 65,000 wounded over a very few days. And remember, the year before on the Somme, the British had 26,000 dead in one day. And then it got worse. And Verdun, of course, went on all during 1916. The reason I'm saying this is, whenever you look at the European Union and you say, I don't like Eurocrats, I don't like Eurogocks, that's fine. But how about the Somme? How about Verdun? How about the Chemin des Dames? You want that? Caporetto. The Italians are now, we're getting up to the Italian disaster at Caporetto. We had 12 battles of the Isonzo River. Yikes. Is that what you want? Think about it. It's maybe the European Union or what was going on 100 years ago. All right. So France votes. We had this terror attack, right? We had some guy killing a cop and getting killed, I guess himself. And this caused a tremendous stir. I hope the French are sophisticated enough to be not to be stampeded, and that's what I'm confident that they won't be ultimately. It's so clear, though. I mean, this could hardly be more obvious. And indeed, we have Trump saying that this terror attack will probably help Marine Le Pen. Well, this is so ham-handed and so obvious and so blatant that I would hope that the French would exhibit the Trump effect. In other words, there's an anti-Trump backlash, and if you don't factor this in, you will not understand the Netherlands election, the defeat of Wilders, and what I hope will now be the decisive defeat of this Marine Le Pen. So, the big four candidates, Macron, M-A-C-R-O-N, he's the leading one right now. Many dubious features, to be sure, but compared to what? Compared to the Chemin des Dames, probably Macron looks somewhat better. So Macron, Marine Le Pen, Fillon, a reactionary. He wants you to work more for less. No 35-hour week, no 32-hour week, but instead just a long Calvary, nasty, brutish, and short. And then we have Mélenchon, right, the leftist with a lot of neo-communists in there. There are some positive features here, but generally speaking, a lot of it is also a laundry list of demands which are appropriate for scoring points in the opposition, but it's not really a governing program. And the idea that you'd leave Europe and build your foreign policy on Venezuela and Cuba, interesting as some of that is, I'm afraid that's not realistic. So whenever you're dealing with people like Corbyn or Mélenchon, you got to worry about this loony left phenomenon. The loony left. If you've been out of power for so long, you get the idea that just about anything can be concocted and thrown out there. Right? That's, in some ways, that's what's happened to the Tea Party. So Corbyn has led the Labour Party into a position of tremendous weakness. We also have to point out, though, the Le Pen is a multi-generational nepotistic operation. You have Jean-Marie Le Pen with all of his outrageous and horrible anti-Semitic statements. Then you got Marine Le Pen. She's now called for an end to all immigration. Legal immigration ends, illegal immigration ends, everything ends. And she also says that the crimes of French officials working for the Nazi occupation, such as the so-called Vélodrome d'hiver of 1942, that don't worry about that. Right? In other words, if the Nazis told you to do something, you were just following orders. Bad, bad, bad stuff. What's the point of that? Who are you appealing to? It's clear who she's appealing to. The nostalgique of Vichy and so forth. So, our appeal aux Français. We say, il faut fermer la porte pour cette racaille d'extrême droite qui sont indignes de l'esprit de la France, de la grandeur et la dignité de la France. Et ça suffit. So, that was my appeal to the French voters to not vote for the extreme right and to, voter utile. That's another one. Vote usefully. Vote useful. Meaning, vote strategically. Don't vote for the darling cherished of your heart's desire, but do it in such a way that Le Pen is defeated. Sorry to have to interfere, but it's all very out in the open, right? I'm not doing this through fake news, and it's a kind of international solidarity. Notice that Bannon is the one who says that Marine Le Pen is the best. Palin has said that she loves the Le Pen dynasty. Also notice that there's this daughter of Marine Le Pen, right? Maréchal. And the joke here is in the past you had Maréchal Pétain, he was the head of the Vichy government, and now you have La Maréchal, right? So various cartoonists make fun of that. Maréchal is somebody who said that the Prime Minister Valls is a moron, and then he began to have a nervous breakdown, and then she said, "We'll be back next week to give you a heart attack." So that's not saying I'm going to make you a one-term prime minister. It means I'm going to try to give you a heart attack, according to the London Guardian. All right. So maybe we're going to have the Golden Girls International here, and that would be Marine Le Pen and Theresa May. Wouldn't that be great? The entente cordiale of these two charming ladies. The Labour Party, as we said, is 20% behind the Tories. UKIP seems to be disorganized. Farage has gone off to for fresh woods and pastures new. May be trying for the extinction of the Labour Party, the knockout blow, kind of like the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party is back there with 7% of the vote. So that's the French and now the British situation. This is very, very sinister stuff. People that look like Thatcher are bad news. And now we got two of them on the two sides of the English Channel, right? La Manche. All right, Turkey. Erdogan has successfully extorted a victory. Very, very narrow, embarrassingly narrow, made possible by a TV monopoly